Can pleasure and virtue truly coexist? This question has puzzled philosophers for centuries and remains as relevant today as it was in ancient times. On one side of the debate, we have Epicurus, who championed the pursuit of pleasure as the ultimate goal of life. For Epicurus, pleasure wasn't about indulgence, but about achieving a state of tranquility, free from pain and fear. On the other side, we have Epictetus, a Stoic philosopher who argued that true happiness comes not from seeking pleasure, but from living a life of virtue, guided by reason and in harmony with nature. These two philosophies, at first glance, seem to stand in stark opposition to each other. How can one reconcile the Epicurean pursuit of pleasure with the Stoic commitment to virtue? Is it possible to enjoy life's pleasures without compromising on the Stoic ideal of self-control and discipline? Or are these philosophies destined to remain at odds, each offering a different path to the good life? In this video, we'll dive deep into the teachings of Epicurus and Epictetus, exploring their similarities, their differences, and ultimately, whether these two ancient philosophies can find common ground. Join us on this philosophical journey as we unravel the complexities of pleasure and virtue and discover if a harmonious balance between the two is possible. Epicurus and the pursuit of pleasure. Epicurus, often misunderstood as a mere hedonist, actually proposed a much more nuanced view of pleasure. For him, the highest pleasure wasn't found in physical indulgence or excessive luxury, but in the absence of pain and the cultivation of a tranquil mind. Epicurus believed that the key to happiness was to live a simple life, free from unnecessary desires and fears, especially the fear of death. At the core of Epicurean philosophy is the idea that pleasure is the natural goal of human life. However, Epicurus distinguished between different types of pleasures. There are the bodily pleasures, which can be fleeting and often lead to more pain in the long run, and then there are the mental pleasures, which include intellectual pursuits and the enjoyment of friendship. The latter, according to Epicurus, are far superior because they contribute to long-term happiness without the drawbacks of physical indulgence. Furthermore, Epicurus taught that the greatest pleasure comes from ataraxia, a state of serene calmness where one is free from distress and mental turmoil. This tranquility is achieved by understanding the nature of the world, overcoming irrational fears, and cultivating meaningful relationships. In this way, Epicureanism is less about seeking pleasure in the moment and more about creating a life where peace and contentment are the norms. Epictetus and the Stoic path to virtue. In contrast to Epicurus, Epictetus, a key figure in Stoic philosophy, argued that the pursuit of virtue, rather than pleasure, is the true path to happiness. For Epictetus, happiness comes from living in accordance with nature and accepting the world as it is, rather than trying to change it to fit our desires. This Stoic approach emphasizes self-control, discipline, and rationality as the foundations of a good life. Epictetus taught that we should focus only on what is within our control, our thoughts, actions, and reactions, while accepting what lies beyond our control with equanimity. By doing so, we can achieve apatheia, a state of emotional serenity, where we are not disturbed by external events. This is the Stoic equivalent of Epicurean ataraxia, although achieved through different means. According to Epictetus, the greatest good is virtue, which he defined as living in accordance with reason and aligning one's life with the natural order of the universe. Pleasure, from a Stoic perspective, is not inherently bad, but should never be the primary goal of life. Instead, pleasure is seen as a byproduct of virtuous living. Epictetus believed that by mastering our desires and emotions, we can attain a form of inner freedom that is far more valuable than the fleeting pleasures of the body. Can pleasure and Stoicism coexist? At first glance, Epicureanism and Stoicism seem to be fundamentally opposed. One philosophy extols the pursuit of pleasure as the highest good, while the other prioritizes virtue and self-control above all else. However, a deeper examination reveals that these philosophies may not be as incompatible as they initially appear. Epicurus and Epictetus both valued a state of inner peace. Epicurus through ataraxia, the freedom from pain and fear, and Epictetus through apatheia, the Stoic calmness derived from emotional control. Both philosophers recognize that human suffering often stems from desires and fears that are either unnecessary or beyond our control. Epicurus advocated for minimizing these by living simply and focusing on mental pleasures, while Epictetus emphasized accepting the world as it is and controlling our reactions to it. One could argue that the pursuit of pleasure in Epicureanism and the pursuit of virtue in Stoicism are different paths to the same destination, a life of tranquility and contentment. In fact, modern interpretations of these philosophies often find common ground by suggesting that a balance can be struck between the two. For example, one might pursue pleasure, but in a way that is in harmony with Stoic virtues, seeking joy in simplicity, friendship, and intellectual pursuits rather than in excess or materialism. In today's context, integrating the teachings of both Epicurus and Epictetus can lead to a more holistic approach to living. By combining the Stoic discipline with the Epicurean focus on tranquility, one might achieve a life that is both virtuous and pleasurable, where the pursuit of happiness is tempered by wisdom and the recognition of what truly matters. As we've seen, the philosophies of Epicurus and Epictetus offer two distinct paths to achieving a fulfilling life, each emphasizing different aspects of human experience. Epicurus guides us toward a life of pleasure, not through indulgence, but through simplicity, tranquility, and the thoughtful avoidance of unnecessary desires. Meanwhile, Epictetus challenges us to find true happiness in the cultivation of virtue, self-discipline, and acceptance of life's inherent challenges. Though they appear to stand in opposition, these philosophies can be seen as complementary rather than contradictory. Both Epicurus and Epictetus ultimately seek the same goal, a life of inner peace and true contentment. By integrating the pursuit of pleasure with the practice of virtue, we can find a middle path, one that allows us to enjoy life's pleasures without losing sight of our moral and philosophical principles. The question of whether pleasure and Stoicism can coexist isn't just a philosophical debate. It's a guide for how we might live better, more balanced lives. As we navigate our own journeys, we can draw on the wisdom of both Epicurus and Epictetus, aiming to create a life that is both joyful and meaningful.